Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Unapologetically Audacious podcast. I am so excited for this specific episode. So, here on the podcast, we focus on all things about doing the internal work. Everything starts from within, which in turn translates into every aspect of your life. And specifically, that translates into relationships quite significantly. So, today, that's what we're going to be focusing on. And even more specifically, actionable insights and strategies for building and maintaining aligned, fulfilling, loving relationships. And with me to share their insights, I'm so excited to have Luka Reedy, a therapist and coach and host of the Feeling Alive podcast. Luka, so excited to have you on my podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Rebecca. It's beautiful to be here.
You know, I came across your videos a while back, and that is where I first discovered all the amazing things that you talk about. And I resonate with so much of the things that you share, so much of the messages. And I do share it quite frequently with a lot of people in my life and my circle. And I thought, who better than to talk about some of these things. And now more than ever, I'm not sure if you would agree with this, but we're hearing a lot about masculinity. We're hearing a lot about
Mm,
femininity. More people are wanting to attract more than average partners, more than average relationships, or cultivate that rather, create really fulfilled, aligned relationships. So before we kind of dive into that specifically, I really want to share with everyone your journey into this, into self development, and how it all brought you to this point in sharing these messages.
beautiful. Yeah, I think about this. I really love how you talk about above average, having an above average relationship. I think that's like a really cool topic for us to dive into today. But
Hmm.
for most people who haven't really heard of me or seen, I've shared a bit of my story on social media, but there's kind of like two worlds, right? You can be a therapist who is just trained and then decides to have a conversation or work with people who have just based on their education, or you can have a therapist who has got education and also experience. And I fall into that category. And it's quite interesting. It's like I wouldn't say I've started this work and being like, I'm going to go help people with relationships. It actually just naturally unfolded and found me. And one of the ways that I've realized looking back is like, I was, I literally saw every element of a bad relationship for the most of my upbringing. And then I emulated it in my earlier relationships. I became the relationships that I watched growing up. And so before I started doing all this, I first had to go and sort my shit out. Like I had my mum, who is my beautiful light, go through three. She's gone through three marriages, and have finally found someone who she's happy with now. But the first two were terrible. One was just my dad, who was mixed up in gangs and went to prison for armed robbery and was a heroin addict for 20 years. And then on the other side, she met another man who is a violent alcoholic. And so I had experiences growing up where my dad chose drugs over me and my other dad chose alcohol. My stepdad chose alcohol over me. So without realizing it, I think it took a big toll on me through my 20s, and I had to do the healing work. And so one of the biggest things that um, I've found is that I became better in my relationships when the relationship with myself became better. And that's ultimately what healing really is. We're just we're creating above average relationships with others through creating a better relationship with ourselves.
Wow. That's it's very profound, and what a journey that you have been through, and so much admiration and respect for you for having the awareness once you reached that once you had that point of awareness where you realized, you mentioned it was affecting you all in your 20s and something had to change, and you made that, you set the intention and you did the work to heal those parts of you in order to come out a better version of you, and then in turn attract better for you.
Mm.
So, what I want to know is, what was that moment for you like? Like that moment when you realized, I need to heal. It's
Mhm.
time. What was
Yeah,
that moment like? Do you recall that?
I do actually. It's crystal clear. there was a moment in my 20s, mid 20s. I went on I somehow, I don't know why I did this, but at the time I signed up for this 10-day silent meditation retreat. Now, 2 years prior, I was working in another life. I was working with a guy who mentioned to me, he goes, "You've got to try this thing. It's called Vipassana. It's an original teaching of the Buddha, and it's come from like 3,000 years ago from India, and now there's centers all around the world. You just got to go try it, and it's by donation." So I went and looked it up on the internet at that time, and I was like, there is no way I'm going to sit still for 12 hours a day for 10 days, for 10 days in a row and meditate. Like that to me just sounded crazy. So 2 years went by, and then through beautiful synchronicities of life, I ended up finding myself with the last two spots. My ex-girlfriend and I did this. I found myself in the last two spots because of cancellation 2 weeks before I was leaving on this trip. And so I did it. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really understand what I was getting myself into. And before they get in there, they take your phone, they take all journals or your car keys, everything. They put it in a little bag and they tie it up and they say, "This is your last chance to leave. Like, if you want to leave, you leave now." And I was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I getting into? And I said, "No, I'm going all in." And so I handed over my phone, handed over my keys, and started the journey. And then from 6 o'clock that night, we didn't speak for 10 days. You couldn't have eye contact, you couldn't speak, you couldn't read, you couldn't write. You could go out for a walk, but yeah, that was really all you could do. And for the rest, and guys and girls were split up. So you couldn't eat. There was a curtain in the mess at the hall, and you would eat with the guys would eat together, and the females would eat together. And the only time you would ever see the females is in the meditation hall because you'd come in from the sides together. And so from 4 a.m. till 10 p.m., you're up and you're going through this process of meditating. And it was in there where I had this huge realization that all of my body was just filled with emotions, and I could feel them, and they came up through discomfort and they came up through pain. And for the 10 days, what I didn't realize I was doing at the time, but I was healing emotions. I was letting go of all of it. And I I remember this one particular moment, Rebecca, that it was on day 4. When you have never faced your shit, and then you decide to sit still enough for it to come up, because so many of us are so busy in life. I've never sat still for longer than 10 minutes. I remember leading up to it, when I decided I was accepted, I would start to meditate for 5 minutes at a time. And I'd be like, oh my God, this is challenging. I'd never really meditated. And so I went in there, and now I just had to sit still with a whole past that I didn't even know about. I didn't even know healing was a thing. I just accepted past was my past, and that was it. And now I'm confronted with these thoughts, and it was just profound images just popping up of like, it was just a huge detox. And on day 4, I was in that much pain. I was sitting there. I was just about to like burst out in tears, and because of the physical discomfort. And then I had a conversation with myself, and I was like, "Luka, are you going to do this properly? Like, or are you going to walk away?" And I remember sitting there with myself, and I was like, "I'm going to go all in. Okay, I'm going to go all in." So I stopped complaining. I sat there. I stopped moving. I stopped shuffling around, and I just sat in the emotion, and I went through the process that I was being taught. And on day 6 or 7, something profound happened. I just had this overwhelming like vibration through my whole body, where I was like, this is what it feels like. And I could just feel this pain just melting away. And when I left there, I had a smile from ear to ear. Like I was like, why do we need to drink? Why do we need to do drugs? Like, this is incredible. And then from that moment on, I basically became a preacher and said, everyone needs to do it. I called my mum and I'm like, "Mum, you need to go and do this. You need to go and do this. You got a problem with that? You need to go and do it." And so, yeah, that was one of the biggest moments for me.
Wow. I can't even the amount the emotions that I felt just listening to that, and just the pain and just everything that you must have endured in that moment, it's all I feel called to say is just how worthy are we to experience and shed old skin in order to be the best versions of ourselves. And when we give ourselves that opportunity to step into the silence, to step into the unknown and the pain and whatever comes into it, and just surrender and
Mm.
choose love over fear, is truly like a life beyond our wildest dreams. So you remember so distinctly, and it's incredible just the transformation that obviously that like you've undergone just from that alone to where you are now. And
Hmm.
it requires a lot of courage because a lot of people are too afraid to sit with themselves. They're too afraid to do what you did. It was a 2-year thing in the making, and finally you said, I'm doing it. And you chose and you committed, and clearly since then you've honored and you've kept that word that you've made to yourself
Hmm.
to keep doing that and walking into that path. But it's very difficult for a lot of people to do that.
I
So it
understand.
requires a lot of courage, and something I feel like, there should be recognition for and acknowledgement for.
It's the scariest thing to do. The
Yeah.
scariest thing to do is to face your past.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it needs to have a purpose. And one of the crazy thing is just like 2 months before I think it was 2 or 3 months before I did the Vipassana, the meditation retreat, I was crossing the border. I was about to go on a 2 month road trip with my ex girlfriend at the time. And I was crossing the border to go in from Canada to the US because I used to live here years and years ago. And I had this huge fight, like a screaming match with her in the car. And what I realized in that moment, I've never really had, we used to actually have quite a few screaming matches. That's another topic. But like in this case, I was so scared because I was going on this trip that I'd never really had. I lived in 30 something homes before I was 30 or something like that, right? Like I counted them. I've lived in a lot of homes. I've gone to a lot of schools. I've lived across, you know, the whole of Australia. And when I cross that border and I'm staying in this van that I bought and I'm going camping for 2 months, I didn't know where my secure home was going to be. It triggered all of this stuff from my past, which I know now, but I didn't know in that time at that time.
Mhm.
And I ended up feeling so insecure and so scared that I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where we were going to stay. And my girlfriend at the time, she was just kind of like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? And I needed to control everything. I needed to know where we were going to stay. So deep down, I knew that we were going to be safe. I couldn't just sit there and hope, or I'd never had an ounce of spontaneity. I had not even an ounce. I had to have absolute control. But in that moment, I didn't realize that. And
Wow.
so I think that goes to show what an what unconscious trauma can do. But then when you look back and you do the healing, you can look back and you go, fuck, that's not actually me. And I need to change that. And when you look at that from the perspective of the other side and hindsight, you realize healing is just this journey of finding yourself, and how lucky to be able to find yourself, but how scary it is to take that first step. But if you don't take that first step, you don't get to see how good it's going to be.
It's so beautiful, and what's even more, um, admirable and interesting is how young you started that journey. And if, if only more people were willing to really take a hard look at themselves and maybe ask, like, why do I do this, or why do I feel this way, and take a second to really dive deeper like you did, to recognize you were in 30 some schools growing up, you lived in so many different places, you didn't have that stability, that security. But a lot of people go through life with these feelings, but they don't really understand where it came from, and
Hmm.
you did. So, and then we are what we attract, right? And then we mirror, and then we accept the version of, like, in relationships, let's say, which we're going to step into, we attract who we are. So if we feel a certain way, our standard is how we feel about ourselves.
Hmm.
So in what you just said with your healing process and everything you realize, and on that note, in your opinion, how can people create more certainty within themselves by getting to know themselves in order to cultivate aligned, fulfilling, and rich relationships? It, beyond the inner work, where can we start within ourselves in order to work towards that outcome?
I always tell, I don't know if you've seen this, but I always say sexy is an energy. And like, no man really wants to convince you that you're sexy because, like, and this is not, I'm thinking about this in the sense of confidence. Like, if you think about someone who's coming into the room and they might have, all the things that socially they said, they've got the nice hair, they've got the nice perfect figure, like that would, to someone would say, oh, they're confident. But then that is a truth to certain people. But then I've also seen other women or other men walk into the room who have undoubtedly owned who they are as they are.
Energy.
And it is so sexy. And they, like, I've got this friend of a friend who I met last year, and I call it Lulu energy. Lulu had this most incredible level of confidence I've ever seen in anyone. It turns out she's actually been tested and she has no inner dialogue. So it gives her this unapologetic confidence, right? And so she's telling me, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to her and she's talking about her story. She's an English woman, and it was this incredible conversation. She's telling me how many people she's picked up before, and she's talking about all her lovers all over the world. And she's like, oh, my lover over here, my lover over there. And like, for me, she's not necessarily the typical socially accepted, like, supermodel that you put on a magazine, but she is pulling people left, right, and center. And I call this like the Lulu energy. And every single one of us can step into that Lulu energy when we drop that inner dialogue. And we drop that inner dialogue by starting to fully accept and own who we are. I'm not here to convince you how beautiful you are. I'm here to reflect to you what you know deeply about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's the work.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Wow.
work.
Lulu energy. I love the way you've described that. And that's sort of like even just being in your divine feminine, is it not? A divine feminine woman, she I mean in men too, but you own yourself. You
Mm-hmm.
accept who you are, you embrace who you are, as you said, unapologetically.
Mm-hmm. There's a natural radiance in you at your core.
Yes. And so, okay, so then I'm curious to know then, how would you define divine masculinity, divine femininity, and how can we embrace more of ourselves to cultivate that even more and radiate that kind of energy?
Yeah. So I think when we do a lot of healing, we naturally return to that place of this divine
Okay.
feminine and divine masculine. I think when we carry a lot of our trauma, this is what I've certainly seen, is we go to the shadow side of masculinity and femininity. For me, I went through this journey where I went into my femininity, which through a period of time as I was going through healing. I've seen women end up going through a deep level of masculinity, and in their physical traits, they're working hard, they're doing a lot, they're controlling, they're very like structured. In men, especially in spiritual spaces, men can be a lot more softer, they can be more gentle, they can be more flowy. And as we start to do the healing, and I'll talk to myself, as I've started to do the healing, I've started to find my natural masculinity. I've started to realize how important it is to have, or how natural it is for me to be in control, but also to be protective, to also have structure, to also have a strong word that meets my actions, integrity. And so I think when we heal parts of ourselves, we will find this natural masculinity and femininity. But there is a world that we live in right now who define masculinity and femininity very differently. And I know you use the word like divine, which would say, who are we at our core? What is
Mhm.
masculinity and femininity at our core?
Right.
And that's like nature. Nature explains it. It doesn't teeter in between the two. It's like, this is what I am. And I think they are more so expressive qualities as opposed to physical characteristics. You can look at it as if to say, you know, I will receive you as a divine feminine quality, and I will protect you as a divine masculine quality. I
Mm-hmm.
I think for people starting anywhere on their journey, I don't think it's really valuable to focus too much on what is a divine masculine and what is a divine feminine. I think what's so much more important is discovering who they really are beneath all of the shit that happened to them. Because
Mm.
then, as they go on their journey, they can learn how they want to act and how they want to feel. And that will be when they step into the masculine and feminine energies.
Do you think that people can truly heal while they're in a relationship, let's say, and eventually through this healing journey, outgrow maybe the person that they're with because they're healing and then they're stepping into maybe what's natural? And then in turn, the alignment is just not there anymore. Do you think that that can happen simultaneously?
Absolutely. I mean, if two people are growing together and they're deciding, hey, I'm going to go on this, they're in a relationship and they're going on this healing journey, and they discover more about themselves, and they
Mm-hmm.
go, actually, I like this more, and the other person is like, well, I don't. That happened in one of my earlier relationships, and we went this way, and I said, it's not fair for me to say you can't do this if I don't want to do it. I think you get to express yourself in this life,
Right.
and people come for a season, a reason, or a lifetime, and that part you just have to embrace. If there's no energy there, if the values that you're, I think, if you don't ultimately have common interests in that relationship once you're doing the healing, it's there for itself. Like, we can't try and force ourselves to love something about someone if it's not there. And so, yeah,
Right.
heal. If you're ultimately going to change. Change is one of the necessary ingredients for the universe to keep ticking along. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to change, and absolutely, that relationship is going to change you when you start healing too.
Wow. And what would you say, let's say, you have somebody in a relationship, you've got two people, and at one point in time, you were on the same page, you were aligned, right?
Hmm.
You start growing, and then this thing happens where maybe we outgrow each other, or we recognize we really start understanding what our true values are or what we want, and who we step into more of who we are, and we're not aligned anymore. What would you say to those people who are maybe afraid to let go in order to step into what's best for them and of their highest good?
You also have to look at it like this too. If you're willing to leave that relationship when something isn't in alignment, say it could that's on a scale. What's in alignment could be on a scale. It could be something that's really bad and you don't want to be around that. It could be something that's just like our interests have changed. You're going to not always have 100% alignment in a relationship. That's what a
Mhm.
relationship will do. It's polarity. I always tell people, like, aim for this 70-30. 70% shared interests. 30% you don't want to be the same. You don't want to date yourself. That
Right.
would be the most boring thing. So I would say if you're getting to a point and it is not in alignment, say, ask yourself, like, at the core, is my heart with this person? Do I absolutely love this person? And am I willing to also change? Because I think a relationship will ask you to change. And I think you'd maybe
Mhm.
even want to explore it. If you still love that person, if there's integrity in that person, and you're both working with each other, then maybe it's not the first thing. The first thing you do is maybe not you just, bail. Maybe you just explore and ask yourself that question. But if you get to the point and you've asked that question and you go, you know what, I don't think this is my relationship, because I've seen a lot of women settle for like average and miss out on phenomenal because it's
Mhm.
just okay. And I also say that, like, just okay is probably one of the dangerous areas to be in, because it's not unsafe, it's not volatile. Like, you do get along, but you're just not phenomenally in love. You're not having the most intimate, deep, phenomenal sex you've ever had. And like, I believe that you can have all of those things, but the scariest thing for someone is to get out of average in the hope that something excellent is going to be there, because it's not guaranteed. That's the unknown. The unknown is one of the scariest places.
But then doesn't that also come with an element of trusting so much and maybe yourself and knowing what you desire so deeply and are worthy of, let's say beyond the bare minimum, right?
Mm,
Beyond just okay. You don't know when maybe you'll meet Mrs. Right, Mr. Right. You don't know if something phenomenal is out there, but you know that something better than just okay is out there.
mm-hmm. 1000%. This is standards. You have to have a base level of standards. This is what I accept. This is what I want. And so
Right.
when we look at a relationship that's not working well, you want to make sure it's not ticking the boxes of your standards. Say, this is how I want to be treated. This is how I want to be loved. And this is how I want to experience a relationship. And if those things aren't being ticked, then yeah, you will have to rely on your faith that you are a catch, and this level of self love that you have for yourself and self acceptance that I am worthy of getting something that I believe that I deserve. Right. And so if
Mhm.
most people listening to this need to really just check in to see, do they have those standards, and do they have that level of self love where they go, you know what, I am fucking worth it? Because most people don't. And that's why they stay. They stay in that average, like you say, because they don't believe that there's something else out there. Faith, oops, faith is one of the biggest things that will come to you as you keep taking and cultivating enough evidence. After you take a step, you'll cultivate enough evidence that it's actually going to be okay. Because most people fear taking that next step because they don't think it's going to be okay. But it's just one step and then the next.
Would you say that part of that comes with detaching from the outcome?
Yeah.
What once you develop that trust in yourself, once you develop that worthiness and like you said, "Hey, I'm a catch and I know the kind of love that's out there for instance, because I know the love that I give. So I'm going to detach from the outcome because so long as you detach, you make room for you make room for different energies, maybe an energy that's more serving such as that above
Mm.
average,
Mhm.
right?
Of course, absolutely, 1000%. I'm like just thinking of this quote. I can't remember who said it, but it's relax, nothing's under control.
Yes.
And
Oh, that's so good. I love
and
that.
you just think, well, we're all just little boys and
Wow.
girls clinging on to a reality for safety. Nothing in our great, beautiful minds has control of anything outside of us. So we just have to let go. And for some of us who our nervous systems are still so jacked up from our past, will struggle to do that. And they are the people that will not be able to trust. They are the people that hate the unknown. And I
Mhm.
get it. My nervous system was just as jacked up too. And so it's a practice. And so something might be just like one day of the week, you don't follow your regimented regime every day, and you just maybe adventure outside of your comfort zone and just see if it's okay,
Mhm.
if it's safe. And that can be just your simple way of doing that daily to collect evidence that it's okay to let go. And then you'll start to build this beautiful, wonderful relationship with the unknown. I love this. I tell my clients this all the time. Where the hell are we? Like, will look at that sky tonight if I'm lucky, if it's clear enough. There'll be some stars. What is that? It's a never ending space of nothingness
Mhm.
that no one has been able to fully measure or define how big it is. And yet we are spinning around this fireball that is somehow not running out of fuel. It's fueling itself, will do so for billions of years. And we're on a ball of rock with water on it, spinning perfectly at a perfect distance around that, holding ourselves up in this infinite nothingness.
Mhm.
We trust that every day. We trust that the sun will keep burning. We trust that our planet will stay up in the middle of nowhere. So we got to use that level of trust in ourselves every day we get up. We've got to bring that trust into our daily life.
Wow. Well, it definitely to really have that trust in ourselves, it starts with the self, everything. And that's what it comes down to, right? It starts with that self, cultivating that, and it's like a muscle, working it every day and reminding ourselves that, like you said, it's safe, it's okay. And I love that that insight of maybe taking, stepping out of the regimen that you do one day a week and doing something different and just showing yourself, hey, it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
um, and on that note, with it kind of starting with yourself, I'm curious to know that in, let's say, these more, in above average relationship, right? This is something that I talk about a lot to people too. Friends, everyone at this point, I think they're a little bit annoyed with me, but I'm like, you so deserve a phenomenal relationship. Look at you. Look at the energy you radiate. Look at who you are. You deserve this and more. Why not? You get one life. If you're going to do it, go big. You deserve
Mm.
it and you get to step into it. How do you know you have found an above average relationship? And then more specifically, I want to talk about maintenance after, but let's start with, how do you know that you found that?
Mm. Oh, very good. Well, I think you've got to look at yourself in the mirror before you even think about like measuring a great relationship with another person, because you're going to notice that if you look at yourself in the mirror, you're going to be looking for a couple of things. Do I need this person? Is this person a necessity, or are they a bonus in my life? If they're a bonus, you win. You're in a
Mhm.
great relationship because you are not putting all this pressure on that relationship to be what you need it to be for your happiness.
Mhm.
You don't need them to, do the dishes a certain way. You don't need them to say certain things to you. You don't need them to write back to your text message every day. Most people need the relationship to be a certain way so they can feel good about themselves. But if they go into the relationship already feeling good about themselves, they're in a great relationship.
I love that. So beautifully said.
Mm.
Thank you for that. I'm sure a lot of people are going to really resonate with that. And with that idea of not necessarily needing somebody, you have a lot of people who are deeply afraid of not being with somebody.
Mm.
They're afraid of being alone. And so they stay. It's like you mentioned earlier, it comes down to standards and so on.
Mm.
Do you maybe have a piece of advice for those people after hearing what you just said to a person who is currently in a relationship because they're afraid of being alone, knowing that something is better, but that loneliness is so crippling? What would you say to them right now?
Oh, I feel you. I feel you. And I know it's the hardest time when you're in your bed at night. All those emotions come flooding into your life. I work with some clients right now who have struggled with this. They're struggling with the idea that they'll never find their person. And I would say this one thing. There like everything in this world is temporary in nature. Even in your aloneness, even if you spend 70 years alone, it's still temporary. Nothing will last forever. And a lot of times when people feel like a sense of loneliness, oh, it's like this is eternal hell. And I get that. There is a period of my life where I had to face this, a loneliness. I left my I left a relationship. I was now cooking dinner alone in the kitchen, and I just started crying. And I cried because no one was in this kitchen with me. I didn't have my girlfriend. I didn't have my companion. I was just confronted with this deep sense of loneliness. And I cried.
Mhm.
And that's the first step. Just cry. Just let your feelings come out. And then I was gifted enough with a beautiful message to keep me going on the path. I thought I was lonely. Even though it was a brief period of my life, I thought I was lonely. But I had a lady come up to me and tell me, "You're not lonely. This is not a period of loneliness. This is a period of aloneness." and it's very different. When you're alone, you're choosing to spend time with yourself. You're choosing to face the things that you don't like about yourself. You're choosing to face the feelings that you haven't dealt with. A period of aloneness is very different to a period of loneliness. And I think that's something that you have to reconsider. That if you do leave this relationship, you won't be lonely. You will be alone. And that alone time is the most valuable time in your life.
Wow. The
Yeah.
distinction that you just made, just I can't tell you that it's it's very profound, because that distinction is such an important one to make, that I think if more people really understood that, they would be more comfortable with being alone
Mm,
and less fixated on how long am I going to be alone for, or give it a different meaning. They would be more purposeful in that
hmm.
aloneness, in that alone time, feel more fulfilled and cultivate more inner joy.
I say this also, I completely agree. I say this to some of my clients too. And I say, like, okay, let's just say for the next 12 months, you're going to be alone. And most of them, they're kind of like, what, like, no, like, want to meet my partner now, and they're struggling with this period of aloneness for just a couple of months. And I said, well, okay, well, let's just give you 12 months. I gave you 12 months alone, but on the day after that, like the 366th day, you met your person that you would spend the next 40 to 50 years with. Would 12 months alone be so bad if you spend the next 50 years with the person that you could not imagine living without? No. Like, you wouldn't even think about that time. You go, what time was I even alone? Because life was so full now, you don't look back at the period of being alone, because you're
Mhm.
now focusing on the moments that are so full.
But it's interesting, right? It's if people knew, right, their time frame, let's say, they would have no issues with it. But it's like anything in life, right? It's patience,
Mm,
it's trusting in that process, it's the consistency of knowing that if you continuously do something, the probability of success is much higher than not. So if you're spending that time in aloneness, let's say, you do the work, you develop yourself, the probability of attracting somebody, for you, somebody above average and all those things you're looking for is higher.
mm,
And then also a lot of people give up what they want most for what they want now.
mm. Amen. Amen. You know what they also do? They compare their dating experience with their friends. And they're
Mm.
like, oh, but my girlfriends, the amount of times I've heard this, oh, but my girlfriends, they're having a hell of a time. And they're dating so many boys and just getting shitty people and having shitty experiences. I'm like, just stop right there.
That's not your reality.
Hmm. Those people have a certain experience with certain
Mhm.
beliefs, with certain values, with certain karmic lessons. If we start playing that game where we want to compare ourselves to our friend, then we have to go and take her whole life or his whole life and adopt it.
Mhm.
So you can't do that because you're so
Mhm.
unique to that person. So if any of you are out there comparing yourself to your friend, stop it now.
Mhm. Say it louder. Stop it now. Okay, so with that in mind and just comparison in terms of the maintenance of a relationship, let's say, I really want to get on that, but I feel like I need to touch on the comparison. Let's say you're in this relationship, right?
Hmm.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
Hmm.
I forget who said that, and I know it's someone obvious.
Hmm.
I don't remember who said it, but comparison is the thief of joy. And sometimes we can do that while we are in our relationships,
Hmm.
right? How would we how do we move in a relationship where we can eliminate that comparison, eliminate what we might think could be a threat sometimes, or when we're in those moments of maybe insecurity or just the our vibrations, our frequency are just a little bit lower in those moments. How
Hmm.
can we remove any of that kind of comparison while we're in that relationship while equally ensuring that we don't sabotage what we currently have?
Well, inspiration is also a form of comparison. Like, if we're
Okay.
looking at other people and we're inspired by them, we're using that person to help us grow. And so, in a relationship, I think we're going to always look at it's healthy to look at other people's relationships if they're doing something that is incredible. And like,
Mhm.
their sex life is great. And you talking to your girlfriend and be like, oh my God, we're doing this. And be like, okay, I'm not getting that. I want that. Or your friend's got a man who communicates so well and is in touch with his feelings and doesn't get embarrassed at a dress up party like most men do. Oh, cool. I don't have that. So, in a certain sense, looking at other relationships as a measure of what you want and as confirmation for what you can have is beautiful.
Mhm.
Go do it 100%. Compare yourself. And at that same point, the biggest thing that's going and that is missing in most people's relationships and is mostly present in below average relationships is a lack of communication. There is no successful relationship without communication. How uncomfortable it is to have a hard conversation these days,
Mhm.
but so necessary if you want to take it to the next level. I have a great relationship right now, the best one I've ever had. I've married her. I love it. Every part of it. No, I'll take that back. Not every part of it is great because we're always working on something. Not because we choose to, but because it's necessary. It's
Mhm.
necessary. And the relationship just keeps getting better and better and better. And the very first thing that took that relationship from average to amazing, which I'm very fortunate was in the early days, was having a hard conversation. At the same time, being so self aware that you know that that conversation is not a projection. And the way you do that is you have to take ownership and look, because when you point a finger, they say, this is the saying, you point a finger, there's three fingers pointing back.
Mhm.
Look at yourself first before you have that communication. And if both partners can do that, oh, mate, it's done. Signed, sealed, and delivered.
Perfect. Okay, so that leads me to communication. Absolutely, a major key top tier component to a successful relationship. And you mentioned projections and having enough self awareness to know the difference. So, would you say this is the same or different? My question for you is, what is the difference between comprehension and communication, or the intersection? Because we can communicate, but what if our partner is not fully comprehending what we're saying? And it's not a case of just, I understand, but in this case, we're just both disagreeing. It's a case of you're communicating, but the comprehension is not traveling through.
Absolutely.
That's what I want to know from you. Comprehension versus communication, and then
One
connected.
cannot exist without the other here. Like I can
Okay.
say all the things I want, but if they don't land, what's the point?
So is that us? Is that as a result for the way that we are communicating?
It can be the way you're communicating, it can be the way that you're listening, but at the center of all of it is a little boy and a little girl who's fighting for something.
So how do you bridge that? How do you break that tension? How do you remove the ego and lead with love in that moment to understand, even if you disagree?
I think a big fight might be necessary.
Mm.
Sometimes it's the hardest thing we'll have to go through, but if there has to be a screaming match for someone to go, I've never had a fight like that, well, then let's look at why. Sometimes a breakup is necessary. Sometimes it needs to get really ugly before it can get really beautiful. But
Mm.
I can't sit here and force my partner to listen. I can't. And it's not my responsibility. But equally, my partner isn't listening to me, I would also look at if I'm listening to that person. I read a great book, one of the best books you could ever read, I think anyone. I read it when I was 18. It was my first personal development book ever. How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's one of the best sellers. It's the all-time biggest sellers. And one of the things they talk about that is the best way to win an argument is to not join in,
Mm.
right? And so I think two people with their egos fighting each other aren't listening. They're just communicating. There's no comprehension. So if I'm not being heard, then I'm going to listen. And try and do that to someone. It's like try and say sorry if you're really angry or frustrated. It's literally impossible. It's like, the magnets
Hard.
hitting each other and they don't accept each other. It's the hardest thing to do. So if you can work on that, if you can work on just listening when you want to shout and scream, that other person is going to soften. Their shell is,
Mm.
because all they are screaming for is to be heard. It might not have been you. It's probably not you, the first person that's never heard them. It's probably their mum or their dad. But if you want to help your partner find their best self so the relationship can thrive, listen. Just listen.
And there's an art in listening, isn't there?
Oh, deep listening,
It's
active
its own
listening.
skill.
Yeah. I mean, so many of us are so distracted. And I've definitely found this in my life where I've been distracted in a relationship and you're like on your phone when people are chatting and your partner's talking to you and then they go, "You listening to me?" Like, huh? What? That is like, you want to just be fully there, look them in the eyes, really hear them from their soul. What are they trying to say? If you really want to take it to another level, summarize what they said. And if you
The
can,
power of presence.
yeah. And if you really want to practice getting better at listening too, you can just do that. You can listen, actively listening to hear what they're saying and then repeat a couple of words that they said. I say, okay, I hear that from what I'm hearing is you're saying this. Or what I hear is that this is the case. Okay, cool.
And so would you say that part of that is sort of like you mentioned, let's say, you're like, hey, did you hear what I'm saying? It's responding to that person's bid for connection at the same time, right? While it's
Mm,
also listening, it is a bid for
it is.
connection. So, on that note, listening being part of that, how can we how can we more intentionally and make more of an active effort to respond to each other's bids for connection? And you hear it all the time. Like let's say your partner comes home from work and they say, "Oh, I've had such a long day." And then you say, "Oh, well, you didn't see my day."
Mm-hmm.
It's a bid for connection and you've just shut them down. Not maybe intentionally, but then do you know do you
I
know what I mean?
understand.
There's no longer that softness and that vulnerability. What can we do better to respond to each other's bids for connection so that we can ensure that we're each feeling heard beyond the skill of active listening?
This might sound like a contradiction to maybe everything I've said, but it's not your partner's responsibility to listen to you. And what I mean by that is like we put all this pressure on our partner to be a certain way. Like I want them to listen to me. I would love that. The
Mhm.
relationship doesn't thrive without that. I get that. But why is it their responsibility to hear us? So what I do and what I think is the most necessary thing for us to do is to spend time hearing ourselves. Spend time with ourselves. Spend time digesting our feelings. For me, like that could be a walk by myself in nature, or it could be sitting down and in a meditation and just sitting in some stillness. Both of those
Mhm.
work. But at the end of the day, I've got to work out what I'm feeling and what I'm wanting from that other person and demanding from that other person so it doesn't become this moment of tension. It doesn't become this complex thing that needs to be solved by the other person. I
Mhm.
think that is really going to help because I think a lot of people, when this bid for connection, what you just said was like, I love those words. I'm like, wow, we
Mhm.
really are bidding for connection. Every day we move, we're bidding for connection. Let's not make it our partner's responsibility to be connected. Let's make it our own.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And you said that, it contradicts what you said earlier. And somebody said this expression to me the other day, and I've actually never heard it before. Two things can be true at the same time,
Mm,
right? So contradictory, but is it really if two things can be true at the same time?
mm.
So beautifully said, truly. Really appreciate you saying that. And I think that specifically is something that a lot of people are going to resonate with, because I think it can give us permission to rid ourselves of the guilt sometimes. And when you recognize that you have to have your own awareness, your own accountability, and you're not entirely responsible for that, we can move a little bit different and a little bit easier without that pressure,
Mm.
because that can lead to a lot of overthinking among things that maybe just don't serve you.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest problems in one of the biggest problems that sitting with yourself solves is overthinking. And
Mhm.
overthinking spirals for all of us, and it ends up creating so much more chaos than what it should. And one of the
Right.
biggest solutions to that is being comfortable with yourself. I think the essence of our conversation, if you can take one thing away, is be comfortable with who you are. Everything, business, career, relationships, it all manifests exponentially from that. Success manifests exponentially from that in whatever you do. But just be comfortable with who you are. Stop looking outside of yourself for answers or for solutions or to feel better. It's not going to get you there. It never will. They are bonuses, they're not necessities.
Beautiful. So beautifully said. And I know that we're just about, we're just about at the end here, but there was another topic I wanted to touch on really quick,
Of course.
in the context of sort of maintaining that relationship, and from a surface level standpoint, from the flesh standpoint, not a soul level
Okay,
standpoint.
let's go.
In a relationship, part of the maintenance, we live in a time now where there are so many distractions.
Hmm.
There's social media, we have access to more than we ever have before, right? So you're in a relationship, and on the surface level, we have these, someone quoted it like this, and it was so crazy. It blew my mind. It was, people have these benign points of entry. So, for example, with social media, where, infidelity and all that is at an all time high,
Mm.
because our access to what's out there has drastically increased. And when we do that, we operate from like a fleshy kind of
Oh,
level, right?
yeah.
It's not coming from a place of love.
Hmm.
It's not from a soul level. So it's a surface level. And so then our consciousness, our conscious rather, gives us permission to slide into someone's DMs or respond to something that maybe in your heart of hearts is not innocent, but because it doesn't sound bad, it's not. And I wanted to just quickly touch on that surface aspect of in relationships and modern dating, given social media and this world of incredible access that we have.
Hmm. The material world is our greatest temptation.
Mm.
I truly believe the only thing and the only reason we are here on this planet in the flesh is to learn. That that lesson, be it for the soul or be it for, the evolution of this planet, doesn't matter. You're here to learn. And one of the greatest things for a lot of men and a lot of women is to learn to control their temptations.
Mhm.
Especially as a man, I've had to learn this the hardest way, from coming from a place of infidelity myself and lying and all of that. I think the biggest problem for everyone is they're seeking something. It's the infidelity. When you think about it, what are we seeking? We're seeking validation. We're seeking connection because we're so insecure and we're so disconnected.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a journey here that we go on, and I've definitely gone on it as a man. For a man, it's very different to a woman. For a man, I'm learning how to control myself. One of the sexiest things for a woman is to see a man who can control himself, and that
Yes.
starts with. Would you agree? Yeah.
Absolutely.
When he says something, he does something. That drops a woman straight into her feminine. She's like, "Yeah, this guy's safe. He's absolutely safe."
Mhm.
So many of those boys talk shit. And so the hardest part for a female going out in this dating world is trying to figure out which man is speaking truth and which man is talking shit.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of them, they're all starting to say great things. And then later on, the real self gets revealed. And they go, oh shit, this isn't my type of person. And I think for women in this world who are trying to find a safe man, you're going to look for a man who um, follows through on his word. And I say, like, this is the easiest thing. Talk to a man that you're dating. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but talk to a man that you're dating and ask him what he's doing, what he's working towards, and then sit still and see if he does it. So say he's working on, building this business or he's going to the gym. What's his consistencies and does he execute? That's the first sign. If you can start to see a man who's actually following through on his word, then start to explore him deeper. If not,
Mm-hmm.
like go. But then the other thing, so for men, we're really learning to be disciplined in this fleshy world. For women, you're really learning how to receive, how to be supported. And so for a lot of us, I think for a lot of women, correct me if I'm wrong, it's really hard to receive. It's actually like, I've seen so many women that struggle to receive just a compliment, let alone someone shouting them a coffee. If I tell them how great they are, they deflect it or they don't believe it. They might say thank you, but they don't believe it. And so one of the biggest things for women to really drop into the feminine for herself and things that she needs to learn is that she is beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
perfect as she is, not with this, certain supermodel look or, the clothes are just accessories to beauty. They don't add beauty. They're accessories to beauty. And she has to remember that. And that's her lesson. Otherwise, she's going to go out there and look for validation and try and find, instant satisfaction and gratification through other
Mm-hmm.
people. And so I think that's what really, like, if we want to look at that on the woman's side, if you want to find more satisfaction in this fleshy world, find more satisfaction in who you are as you are. If you're a man, you want to find more satisfaction and more success in this fleshy world, find more discipline and self-control.
I always say you're enough simply because you exist.
Mm,
So
amen.
everything you just said is so incredible because men and women, I mean, men too, but if only we all could just live more unapologetically, authentically, spare ourselves from and save ourselves time, just speak our truth, walk in our truth, and go through dating, find the right person quicker, so long as we're being honest with ourselves, they're being honest with themselves, spare ourselves the cat and mouse game and in waiting a year from then for the mask to come off
Mm,
and just being so comfortable in yourself that you can even your radar and your intuition is strong enough to know when maybe something seems a little bit disingenuous, let's say,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
as well.
Your bullshit detector gets
Yes,
stronger
there you go.
when your need for
Yeah,
validation gets weaker.
that's right.
Right? Because you, like it perfectly said, as long as you start to come back into yourself, you can detect bullshit a mile away because you know who you
That's
are.
right.
You don't need their approval. You don't need their validation. You're not manipulating yourself to be more accepted. So yeah,
That's
well
right.
said.
Well, Luca, just as we wrap here, is there anything maybe that you feel called to say to the viewers today, a message that you feel people need right now?
Yeah, I do actually. I would ask everyone like who's listening to this just to do one thing. Go to the mirror when you can. Look back at yourself and ask yourself, what's wrong with me? What is so wrong with me that I cannot fully accept and love myself as I am? And I guarantee you that'll bring up some emotion for a lot of us. But you have to remember that the answer to that, when you're finished doing that process, is there's absolutely nothing wrong with me.
Beautiful. Luca, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your energy, being present with me and just sharing so much that I think a lot of people are going to heal from resonate with,
Mm.
and really be able to and cultivate hope. Cultivate hope that things will be okay. So,
Mm.
truly, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I have so much gratitude for your time, for your space, for your energy, for being present. And I feel very humbled that I got to have you on my podcast today.
It's been so wonderful here, Rebecca. You have such good questions and love such a beautiful energy, and I'm so glad you're doing this podcast. It was
Thank you.
such a great conversation.